Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and would you look at the calendar, it's still March Multi-Turret Madness Month, the very real and important month for celebrating multi-turreted tanks, and anything else you like really, as long as it has multiple turrets. That's the law. Today I'm going to build this Neubaufahrzeug. That's probably close enough to the correct pronunciation, as close as I'm going to get anyway. This is a very sensible looking interwar multi-turreted tank. The kit is in 35th scale from Amusing Hobby. If you would like to see what's in the box, go watch the What's in the Box video, then come back here.
But I've already seen it!
Watch it again. I start at the beginning, which in this case is the hull. The first step is to attach these side sponson things. The fit is kind of tight, so you'll probably have to apply a fair bit of pressure. Once they're glued on though, they shouldn't go anywhere. Here's the hull top. The instructions say to paint the inside of this black, and that's probably a pretty good idea if you're planning on modelling the vision hatches open. I'm not. This clear part is also included for those who want to model the hatches open. Again, I'm not, so I didn't install this. I did install these, well, I don't know what they are. Fuel tank fillers, maybe? They do need to be installed from the inside, and they can be covered over later, so you might choose to omit them, though it doesn't hurt anything to have them in place. Next, I install the whole top part onto the hull. Some pressure might be needed, but I'm sure you can manage that. These strips are for the bottom of the sponson things. You just have to glue these ovals with slots in the middle into place. It's very easy. There's no reason to not then install those strips. Obviously, be sure that you're putting them around the right way and on the correct side. Final drives are installed here at the rear. There's not much to this, but there's keying, so if you do want to do this wrong, it will take at least some effort. There's a strip of rivet detail that gets installed on both sides of the hull, like so. And then, why not install these brackets on the lower front hull? There's fairly obvious mounting holes for these, which really does take the guesswork out of it. These are for towing shackles, so why not put those shackles on? The little handle bit should face in toward the centre of the hull. They should stay there with friction alone, but gluing is also a good idea. Wheels. It's time for them.
Where's the joke?
What joke? These are simple to glue together, and there is quite a few of them. They can be sandwiched between two of these bogie parts. There are in fact two ways to assemble the bogies, and I chose the more simple version. You need to remove the little pin from the bogie sides, and the arm parts you'll use in this version have a little doodad moulded into the end of the arm that contacts the bogie. This is separate in the other version. The spring and other bit at the end of the arm that contacts the hull gets sandwiched between the arms. It's simple enough. To make sure they're easy to mount on the hull, I'm being careful with the glue so they can still move. I glue the arm so that it stays as far upward as it can go. There are tabs on the bogie sides that prevent it from being positioned too high or too low. I want all the bogies to be consistent, and this will help. There are also some shorter spring parts if you'd like to model the tank on an uneven surface. I've chosen against adding that complexity. The final step is adding a pair of things. I've no idea what they are, but surely they're important. They're also tiny, but not too hard to get into place. And that's one bogie complete. Only 9 more. May as well continue the running gear theme and assemble the drive sprocket. This is made up of 4 pieces, and they're not hard to put together, but there is a tiny bit of play in the fit, so you might like to be careful to get all the teeth lined up nice and straight. Here's the lower rear plate, onto which these brackets are glued. These are obviously for shackles. It makes sense to install these before putting the shackles on, so that's what I do. It drops into place almost perfectly. This makes Herbert happy. I then install the shackles, with the handle of the pin thing toward the centre of the hull. Then these track tension adjustment related looking doovers go on the front of the hull here. A little pressure may be needed, but there's nothing too tricky about these. I then install this hatch. It seems a bit more like a door considering its size, but you would call it a hatch. If you do want to model it open, there is more detail you can add to the inside. I'm modelling mine closed, so adding those extra bits does seem kinda wasteful. There is another similar hatch for the right hand side, but we can deal with that later. Now is the time for assembling return rollers. These are rather simple. The thing that's a little bit tricky is that they need to be mounted in a bracket, and to make that easy, there's a jig. I thought this was a very good idea. The only way to get the assembly to stay together is to glue the wheels in place, so you can't have them free rolling. You obviously should be careful to avoid gluing the frame into the jig. Eventually, I make 8 return rollers and set them aside while I install the drive sprocket. This is held in place by the outer plate part. This makes it really easy to allow the drive sprocket to be free rolling, which you'll almost certainly find helpful when it comes time to install the tracks. It's not that time yet though. Next, I install the return rollers with their brackets. They are slightly fiddly to get into place. You will probably have to do a bit of nudging. Fortunately, there are guides to help you get the correct position. I then assemble a pair of engine deck plates with these, I assume, air vent covers. These are not symmetrical, so you'll have to pay attention to the instructions to make sure you've got them around the right way. There are 2 of these, and they are all different parts, so don't get them mixed up. One of them has a tiny bit of photo etch to be installed, and it might be easier to install that before the vent covers. I did not do that. As the youth say, hindsight is 20/20. Now seems as good a time as any to install the bogies. They almost drop right into place. You can probably see how helpful it is having the spring and other, whatever you'd call it, that contacts the hull being movable. There isn't much to this, you just glue the units on. Assembling the idler wheels seemed like a really good idea, so I did that. The 2-part wheels go together just as easily as all the other wheels, and installing them on the hull, which I do next, is very much like the drive sprockets. It might be ever so slightly helpful for the tracks if you leave these unglued and free rolling, though gluing them into place as I've done shouldn't cause any real problems. How about some more wheels? These go together like every other wheel. For whatever reason I didn't film it. These have brackets mounted on them, which is pretty easy. You don't even need to pay that much attention to which side you put each bracket part onto, as long as you've got the correct parts. They go into place easily thanks to the guides under the idler wheel and in front of the first bogie, and that should really be all the wheels we need. Time for a spot of drilling. There's a few holes that need to be made in the side guards for various versions and tool inclusions that you might want. You should consult the instructions to determine where to drill. Once the holes are drilled, I install the guards onto the hull. This is as the instructions instruct, but if I could turn back time, if I could find a way, I would leave these off and skip ahead to track installation. I will talk and complain about the tracks later, it's just that the way I ended up installing them would have been easier with clear access to the top run of links. Installing the guards is easy though, so let's keep going. There's side plates that sit nicely between the guard and the top of the front plate. You might find you need to use something like a knife to press them into place, but they're not too difficult. Then there's some bracing. I found it kind of difficult to position this. That's why the first shot is me clipping off the guide pin. It could be an error on my part, probably is, but I couldn't get the part to sit properly with the pin in place. It does mean I had to eyeball the part, but I think I got it in the right spot. Now for some photo etch. Yay. These parts need to be bent over on themselves, which wasn't really that bad. Then why not glue them into place? Obviously because photo etch is metal, I'm using superglue. These parts are simple enough to install. They sit above the support bracket and get pressed down into place. I hope your superglue doesn't bond too quickly. More photo etch goes onto these engine deck plates. These bits are tiny, which, unsurprisingly, increases the difficulty. The one with plenty of room to work isn't too bad. The one you can probably barely see under the armoured cover was kind of annoying to try and kajigger into place. How about a little more drilling? That'll be fun. 3 holes need to be made in this plate. It's simple stuff. Installing the plate is also simple. It goes here, on the rear. I quickly follow that with these plates, with the air vent covers. They do look similar, but they're not the same, so be sure to put them in the correct positions, otherwise the Neubaufahrzeug Engine Deck Society will have some very strong words for you. The driver's hatch goes on next, and again, if you'd like to model it open, there are some tiny photo etch handles you can add. Mine is clearly being modelled closed. Why not add the rear plate next? This is yet another plate that more or less drops right into place. You might like to add a touch of pressure, but it is a very good fit. Then I add some small handles in various places, and by various places, I mean on the driver's hatch and on the rear of the engine deck. Those are totally various places. On the rear plate, there's a clear light part. I'm not really sure why this is a clear part. It's going to at least need the solid non-light part to be painted. What matters is the part is easy to place. Look at that, it's right there. Might as well add the rear hatch while I'm here. There's no internal detail for this part. No little latches or handles, nor is there an engine to see inside, but you could still model it open if you wanted. The hatch on the right side here is the same part number, but this time there's internal handle detail parts for it. Still nothing on the inside though. I then glue this vent part inside the fan cover, I guess you'd call it. There should also be a bit of photo etch on the inside of this. I didn't bother because I didn't think it was going to be visible. Once that's together, why not install it on the hull? It mounts into those 3 holes I drilled before. It does kind of seem a shame to cover up that nice looking fan though. It's exhaust time. First, I glue these 2 plates onto the end of this pipe, which is a muffler. It's easier to do it this way rather than trying to line the plates up next to each other. The pipe works as a guide. The second pipe should fit into place very easily, and unless you've done something very wrong, this end part should also fit into place nice and easy. At the other end, I add the exhaust pipes. Nothing too difficult here. Try not to stab yourself with them. I set that aside to install some other components, like this cylinder here. I am assuming this is another smaller exhaust system. This small pipe had a guide pin on the end, but it didn't seem to want to cooperate, so I cut that off. Then I installed this tiny disc, which was meant to sit on the pin. It's not too hard to eyeball the position. It then goes into place here at the forward end of the small muffler, if a small muffler is indeed what this is. The big mufflers then go into place like so. There are some handy cradle doodads for them to sit in. Then there's a pipe that runs up and over from the engine deck. There's keying on the engine deck end, which will probably help you not put this on backwards. The small muffler then gets an exhaust pipe, which is bent and should end up between the 2 main exhausts. There isn't anything to hold this up, so you should be careful to not allow it to sag before the glue bonds, otherwise you'll have a saggy pipe, and who wants that? Nobody. Here's the hatch for the front left of the hull. It looks pretty much the same as the one on the other side, but it's different. Or at least it has a different part number. Is it really worth worrying about? No. Next I put the covers on these whatever they are holes. The instructions show you can model these open, as I've not done. And now, some tracks. There is a jig for this, and it's actually pretty good, and using it is pretty straightforward. You put the links in the jig, and then you press the pins into place, and that's where it's a little bit bad. The pins are, well, they're not good. I'd go so far as to say they are kinda bad. And you have to install one on either side of the link, which is kind of annoying in itself. I am aware that I'm installing the pins wrong here. It didn't quite click in my head at the time, but the instructions do show that you're meant to use the bit of sprue that the pin comes on to help press it into place, and it is a good idea, in theory, except in reality, it doesn't really help. The pins still bend. I did get enough links together for the spare track links, which at this point is all the instructions want. As I'm sure I've already mentioned, I do think it would be a better idea to put the tracks on as soon as the running gear is ready, before the side guards. It's probably worth noting that the kit, or at least my box, didn't come with enough pins for all of the track links. I worked out that I had about half of the pin sprues needed. Even if I didn't bend any of them, I was never going to have enough pins to assemble the tracks in the correct way. Anyway, the spare links go here, and they do look pretty good. On the front of the hull, I install a headlamp. First, the end of the hinge part goes on, and then the light itself. This is a cool pop-up light. There is a clear plastic lens you can put in if you wish to model this in the up position. I'm installing it in the closed position, mostly to make life a bit easier when it comes time for paint, if such a time ever comes. The front mudguards go on now. Obviously there is one of these for either side. Then I literally drop this into place. I think it's a siren or a horn or some kind of warning device. Vision hatches then go into place on either side of the... it's not the actual turret ring, the below the turret ring bit. You can see what I mean. There is some photo etch detail for the inside for those wishing to model these open. Same for these vision slit hatch things for the driver. As I've already mentioned, I'll be modelling these closed as well. Back to the front mudguards, I install these little springy looking things. There is also some photo etch that would go over the hinge point of the mudguards, but that's only applicable to vehicle number 8, which I assume I'm not modelling. Here's some more photo etch. This is quite small. Those squares are 10mm, so it's not super tiny, but it is still very small. These parts form a latch that holds a shovel in place. It was quite a pain to kajigger them together, so after spending way too long on it, I gave up. I didn't initially realise, but there are in fact plastic shovels and other tools with their mountings moulded into them as an alternative to the photo etch mounts. You can probably tell that I'm not a rivet counter, and my sanity, arguable that I have much of it, but it's more valuable to me than spending many frustrating hours to have super fine photo etch bits holding shovels onto my Neubau Double Woobler. It is certainly nice to have the option for both. I mount the shovel with the moulded in retaining latch here, and I follow that with this bracket. There's not much to this. This one here was a little bit more tricky. I wasn't totally sure if it should be leaning against the hull like the bolts on it would suggest, though looking at the picture on the box would suggest that is the case. I then add a strip of photo etch with some rivet detail here. It does look a bit rough, but it could be worse, I suppose. I add some more photo etch here. These are little brackets that go over the exhaust pipes. These could have easily been plastic parts. I'm pretty sure I bent them around the wrong way and didn't feel like bending them back the other way. They have a slight angle to them, so it was either have them around the right way or have the L side profile shape being around the right way. If anybody asks, they just built this particular Neubaufahrzeug this way by mistake. Whoopsie doodle. I follow that by adding the mounts for the gun cleaning kit on the left rear of the hull. These are not quite keyed, but they are easy enough to position in what appears to be the correct place. I then install that gun cleaning kit. It seems to fit pretty good. Now for some more details. There's a pair of, I assume these are wrenches for adjusting track tension. They go on the front guards here like so, one on either side. These are obviously the version without the photo etch. These little S-shaped doohickeys, which probably have a very important name, and a hammer go here, nice and easy. And a bit further back, I install a crowbar, which is where the crew's pet crows go to hang out.
Oh, you're so funny, Herbert.
Then a wire cutter, or maybe it's a bolt cutter. It's a cutter, probably for cutting something. Next to the cutter there's a fire extinguisher. The photo etch for this looked exceptionally annoying. Unless you want the most extreme detail, this part looks just fine. Most tanks have a jack, and the Neubau Wimbly Dimbly is no exception. This jack needs a bit of assembly, and that's fairly simple. You get all the main bits into place, and I'm pretty sure I've got everything around the right way, though I did make a mistake by installing one of the end parts before its mounting bracket. Fortunately, I quickly saw the error of my ways and rectified the problem. The handle, for whatever reason, includes a bit of photo etch. It is fiddly because it's small, but it wasn't really that hard to get into place. And here we have one jack ready for installation on the hull, which I do next. It goes here just in front of the fire extinguisher with the handle on the inside. There's a second mounting bracket that goes over the body of the jack. It required a bit of nudging, but it's not too tricky to deal with. And there is of course a photo etch option too. Next, probably the least annoying bit of photo etch in the kit. These triangles that go at the front here, between the hull and mudguard. It's just a flat plate that requires no bending. Let's save some of that photo etch for later on. It's time for turrets. Pretty important when it's March Multi-Turret Madness month. Small turrets first. These have a little strip that gets installed along the top at the front there. Then there's this inner window. It's not really a window, it's the inner portion of a vision hatch. I figured that wouldn't be needed, nor would the other bits of hatch mechanism if I was modelling them closed. Believe it or not, that is what I'm doing. So I simply glue the hatches onto the sides of the turret body. These are different for either side. Their shape should pretty easily let you know if you are putting them on the wrong side. You wouldn't do that though, would you? Gluing the upper and lower sections together is quite simple, though it's not quite a drops together situation. You may need to apply some pressure so they go together with no gap. These smaller turrets are armed with a machine gun, and that gets inserted into the mantlet from the inside. Simple enough. They do have a little hatch, presumably so the gunner can look out when nothing is shooting back. You could model this open, but I'm not. Not only is it just easier to model it closed, but it should also help hold the gun in place. Once that's all together, it gets installed in the turret front plate. There is a couple of retaining brackets that would be glued over the mounts on either side of the mantlet part if you want to elevate and depress the gun, or I suppose if you were going to be able to see inside the turret. Instead of doing that, you could just glue the entire thing solidly in place like I've done. The turret front can then be glued on. This is a good fit, but you will probably still have to apply some gap nullifying pressure. Now for some external details. This, I assume it's an air vent cover, goes into place here nice and easy. Then, a hatch. This, as you can hopefully see, is made up of 2 parts. There doesn't seem to be a particular order in which they should be installed, just put the correct part in the correct place. If you can't figure that out, I don't know how you would even get to this step. There are 3 lifting hooks around the turret, and these are quite small, which does make them kind of fiddly. There are some helpful, if small, guides, so it's not too hard. And there we have 1 completed turret. That's plenty for most tanks, but again, it's March Multi-Turret Madness month. We need another 2. I'm going to assume you don't need to see me building the entire second turret. If you do, just skip back a few minutes and watch me build the first one again.
Get to the main turret, Herbert!
Settle down. I start by gluing the bottom of the turret into place, and the fit here is quite good. Into the turret front, I add the ball mount for the MG. There is a retaining plate that should go in behind this, but because I've glued it solidly in place, I don't really feel like there's a need for the plate. I then install the mantlet for the main gun. There are no retaining parts for the internal portion of the mantlet, but I don't think you would need them anyway. Once you put the external half on, you can either carefully glue it so that it elevates and depresses, or, like me, you can glue it all into place. This looks remarkably like an out-of-focus blur. This is me installing a tiny little dot of plastic on the side of the main gun, casing part, whatever you'd call it. This is how it looks. It was actually surprisingly easy to do. Maybe I just got lucky. Once those little dots are on, these 2 parts go together, forming the base of the main guns. Next, I install the MG barrel into its mount, and I nudge it about a bit until it looks like it's in a sensible position. It's probably not a bad idea to leave this off until later to avoid breaking it. I didn't break it, but it wouldn't be too hard to do. I then install the main gun barrels into the gun casing bit. There are 2 barrels, and it's pretty easy to figure out which one goes where. Why not then install that onto the turret front? Probably needs a bit more glue. As you can see, I've got my elevation quite elevated, and it does look a bit silly, but that's perfect for somebody like myself. I then glue the turret front onto the rest of the turret. It's a pretty good fit, though I did need to apply some pressure, and you can see how the machine gun might get in the way of that, and subsequently broken. Before installing the side hatches, we need some hinges, and these are made up of some very small bits, and so obviously they dropped right into place. I was kind of surprised by this. They did need a little bit of nudging to get into the correct position, but I was definitely expecting a little bit more difficulty with these. Not that I'm complaining, of course. This little hatch goes into place here. You could model it open, but if you were to do so, you probably should have installed the internal part before attaching the turret front. It's not a problem for old closed hatch Herbert though. Side hatches then go into place, unsurprisingly, closed. This kit doesn't really come with any internal detail, certainly not enough to make having such a large opening, well, worth having open. Anyway, I then install this part, whatever you might call it. I did have enough forethought to test fit this with the commander's cupola, just to make sure that it wasn't going to cause a problem installing it first. On top of it, I add this thing, which I'm fairly sure is an antenna mount of some sort, or maybe it's a machine gun mount. I don't know, I'm not a Neubaufahrzeug dongler surgeon. Speaking of the cupola, might as well start working on that. There is more to it than I'd initially expected, including clear parts for all these vision slots. They're not hard to install, though I didn't really want to. The reason I even installed the clear parts is because they will help hold these little shutters in place. The shutters are small, which obviously increases their fiddliness. With the clear part preventing them from falling through the hole, they're not too hard to get into place. I would have liked it if there were enough parts to have them all closed, but there aren't. The instructions seem to want alternating open and closed shutters, so that's what I've done. Next, in these little mounting recesses, I add these bits. They're part of the hinges for the hatch that goes on top of the cupola. I try to get them on as straight as I can, though they will need to be nudged anyway when putting the hatch on. I then add these additional pieces of hinge doodadery on the undersides of the hatch halves. Easy enough. Then I glue the cupola in place atop the turret. This has keying, so it's pretty easy to get into the correct position. Why not then install the hatch? I did have to kajigger the hinge parts a little bit, which is unsurprising. All you've got to do is press them together onto either end of the hatch's portion of the hinge. Whatever this thing is, the instructions tell us that the little arm protruding from it should point upward and toward the rear, on both sides of the turret. And then some lifting hooks. These are like the ones on the smaller turret, though they are of course different parts, and there is a bit more to guide them into place. Next, I add this mount for the antenna. I leave it to bond for a moment so that it won't just fall off when I add other parts to it. And then I install this periscope here, or what I'm assuming is a periscope, probably for the gunner. I'm sure gunners like to look around. On the side of the cupola there's a pair of small, thin rods. I've no idea what they are, but they're probably very important. There are mounting holes which make this very easy, as do tweezers. This odd-looking thing will hold the top of the antenna. It is kind of hard to determine its true position, but that's okay. We can confooble it into place when the antenna is there. Before that though, I add this little antenna holder. This is probably just to make sure that it doesn't flop down over the hatch or something like that. And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, the antenna. This is not difficult to place at all, though it did involve a fair bit of kajiggering and nudging to get it into a position I was happy with. Of course, it can be modelled in the up position. I chose not to because I know that it would be really easy to break. Also, it will be a lot easier to store the model with it down. I'm being practical. On the turret rear, I add a couple more of those tiny little plastic dots, the same as the ones on the sides of the gun. This time they are somewhat in focus. There are also some extra rivets that you are meant to shave off some of the sprues and add to the turret, and some that seem like they're meant to be removed from the turret. I haven't done that, mostly because it seems really annoying to do. I'm not nearly rivet countery enough for it to matter, at least not on my model. If this upsets you, send an angry email to theroundfile@herberterpaderp.com.au.gov/shutup.
Oh, is that a real email address?
Definitely. If you are building your own Neubau gimbal bimble, feel free to add as many rivets as you want. The turret is now done. They are all done. Feel the March multi-turret madness. There is still some stuff that I haven't completed. I did skip over some photo etch. The first bit wasn't really that bad. It's just a couple of handles on this thing. Is it a jacking block? I think it's a jacking block. Both versions of this did require some photo etch. This was the simple version. This next bit of photo etch is the main one I was skipping. Not only because it looked annoying, but also I figured it was likely to be damaged with the amount of handling that comes with assembly. There's no plastic part for whatever this is. There is one bit of photo etch that's missing because I lost it. It was a small box for the plastic rod there, and I'll be honest, I don't really care that it's missing. If it somehow becomes a real problem, the missing part can be hidden with a tarp or something, or some mud. I don't think it's a huge deal. And finally, the tracks. Here you can see a section I've drilled and pinned. These 10 links probably took about 30 or 40 minutes. It would have taken months to get enough links pinned together to form the entire run of tracks for the Neubaufahrzeug, so what I did was use the pinned links around the drive sprocket, only on one side, and the idlers on both sides, where it needed an almost uncomfortable amount of force to get them into place. For the rest, I simply glued the links together, much like with the Tacom SMK that I built the other week. The method was to join a few links together, enough to span the space between mounting points, like return rollers. I let them bond for a bit, then kajigger them into place while they're still pliable enough that I can impart a bit of slack in them. It is still quite time consuming, but significantly faster than drilling and pinning. I didn't film a lot of the track assembly, but I'm sure you can imagine how that went. I did end up using a couple more links per side than the instructions stated, 120 instead of 117, but I guess that's not a real problem. There's plenty of links. I've got a bunch left over. The real problem was that there weren't enough pins, though that could just be a mistake with my particular box. I hope so anyway. Let me know in the comments if you've built this kit and had missing pins. What really matters is I've got all the tracks on, and I think they look rather good, though I do think the left side is a little bit better than the right. Anyway, that's it. I install the turret, and then I install the turret, and then I install the turret. The amusing hobby Neubau Fubelgug in 35th scale is now completed, and I'm quite happy with it. It is an interesting and kind of silly looking tank. It's from the era where there was a lot of experimentation with tanks, which resulted in some really cool and fun stuff like this. At least fun from a modeller's perspective. This model is a pretty good representation of the real thing, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not a Neubaufahrzeug surgeon, so I've no idea if this is 100% realistic and historically accurate, though from the pictures I've looked at, I would say it's pretty close. Of course, as I frequently mention, I'm not a rivet counter, so while I do appreciate some good detail, I am usually going to be satisfied with relatively accurate detail. I don't need anything extreme, though of course your mileage may vary. As far as models go, this is a very nice one, with a lot of detail, and options for even more detail than I added. Not that I left anything off, except for the optional no-tech light. What I mean is the photo etch brackets and tool mounts and such, versus the alternate plastic parts. The plastic parts are pretty good, the photo etch is also probably very good, but it is also incredibly fiddly, and for someone like me, not all that fun. I build models to have fun, and not drive myself insane. In fairness, I did give it a go. I'm happy that the kit allows for both tedious photo etch for those who want it, and plastic-only parts. It's the best of both worlds. Obviously, I did still include a fair bit of the photo etch, and some of the parts simply don't offer a choice, but that's fine. For the most part, I really enjoyed the build. The tracks were definitely not the most fun, as I've already banged on about, but once they're done, they do look pretty good. I think this is only the second amusing hobby kit that I've built, and I'm sure it won't be my last. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend this to a beginner, but if you really want a Neubaufahrzeug, you could probably do worse. Okay, so this video is already way too long. Sucks to be editing, Herbert. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modelling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. There's a link in the description. Come hang out. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing. Share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi if you're able. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.